Jesus is Lord. And he was such a nice Jewish boy. Jesus changed my life. And he's still in the life-changing business. I believe in the divinity of Christ. I believe in the accuracy of the Hebrew Scriptures. I'm convinced that Moses and the ancient Jewish prophets pointed to Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. Jesus died to save sinners, and you are a sinner. Jesus is Lord, and he was such a nice Jewish boy. I love saying that. Shalom and welcome to CrossTalk. My name is Randy Weiss, and I really believe this stuff. Jesus is Lord. And yes, he really was a nice Jewish boy. Now, I must ask your forgiveness in advance for what's going to happen in this program. I want to tell you about some bold-faced lies, and I'll also talk about recent events in Israel that I find to be very, very troublesome. Many of you will likely disagree with my conclusions. All I can do is ask for your attention and hope that when this is over, we can at least be friends. Now, since this will stir up some controversy, I want to let you know how you can tell me off or prod me on. I do read all of my mail, and this program will cause some angry listeners to make their views known. I'll probably read some of your comments on air in the future, so please try to limit the four-letter words. If you love Israel, or if you hate Israel. If you love the Jewish people, or if you hate us. I want to hear from you after you hear from me in this program. You can write to me, Randy Weiss at CrossTalk, P.O. Box 2528, Cedar Hill, Texas 75106, USA. I'll repeat that in a moment in case you didn't get it. Now, since this is going to be about Israeli politics and what I believe to be some errant views held by some Jewish liberals, you might as well write my contact information down early so you can send your comments. Whether you love us or hate us, my website is www.crosstalk.org. You can also message me on Facebook. And once again, since it is not always easy to catch the mailing address, write to me at CrossTalk, P.O. Box 2528, Cedar Hill, Texas 75106, USA. And I want to thank you in advance for joining in this discussion. Jesus is Lord, and he was such a nice Jewish boy. I got to tell you, some folks even get aggravated just because I say that. Nevertheless, since this episode will turn our attention to Israeli politics, I want to point out a forgotten truth about politics that was summed up by another nice Jewish boy. His name was Benjamin Disraeli. Twice, Disraeli served as Prime Minister of England, and being of Jewish heritage, he was the only man who could have made such a claim to fame. He said, there are three kinds of lies. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. This 19th century British statesman understood what some modern liberal Israeli Jews have ignored. To make matters worse, our enemies understand another concept of politics and the press, usually misattributed to Hitler or his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Whatever, whoever, why ever it was written, the practice seems to have worked for our enemies. As the saying goes, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. The Palestinian cause for statehood is being won in the world through just such misinformation. Lies, damn lies, and statistics, better known as propaganda and trumped-up news stories. The purpose of this presentation is to make sure that my audience understands that at the same time our enemies are poisoning the well of the world's ink, simultaneously, the security of Israel's citizens is being lost through a house divided. Israel is a house divided. This should not be. Why must it be a foregone conclusion that an independent Palestinian state must be created within the current boundaries of modern Israel? Does it strike you as troublesome that since 2001, Palestinian terrorists have fired more than 12,000 rockets aimed at Israeli cities? I got to ask you, are you concerned that thanks to Iranian weaponry smuggled through Egyptian tunnels, Hamas now has the capability of striking deep into Tel Aviv, putting a civilian population of more than 3 million Israeli citizens at risk? It seems to me that The actions of terrorists firing rockets at innocent civilian centers in Israel must be condemned, not rewarded. There would be international outcry if Muslims fired on Chicago, Paris, or Brussels. Is most of the world silent about these attacks because it's only Jews in Israel who are threatened? Why is this uncivilized behavior justified by so-called civilized peoples? And who has any right to condemn Israel for defending its citizens against Islamic terrorism? Certainly not any of us in America who have powerless, friendly nations to our north and south borders, and we've got comfortably wide oceans at our east and west borders. Unlike Israel, our enemies do not pummel us with rocket fire and suicide bombers. Before anyone accuses me of racism, I want to declare I do not hate Muslims. And I believe that Jesus would have us reach out to Islam with truth and love. In fact, I've worked diligently to produce many TV programs in Arabic, and we have broadcast them across the Middle East on Arabic language satellite networks. I love Muslims. I want to remind my Islamic friends that Jesus was willing to die to achieve his goals on the cross, whereas Muhammad was willing to kill instead. Do we want the love shown from Calvary or the sword wielded from Mecca? The contrast is stark. Maybe that is why Islam denies that Jesus died on a cross. But I don't want to continue talking about religion. I want to discuss the other taboo dinner topic. I want to talk about politics. The entire world knows that the basis of the 2009 Gaza war was to stop Palestinian rockets from raining on Jewish communities. Somehow, from the very moment that Israel retaliated, Palestinian PR experts manipulated world opinion by spreading exaggerated stories of civilian deaths and alleged wanton killings by Israeli soldiers. Such lies are a constant component in the Palestinian myth. Yet the myth is propagated by what can only be an ongoing partnership with the international press, who endlessly reported massive casualties during Israel's response. Even the United Nations reported unmitigated garbage about the events. But since the alleged statistics came from the UN, it was accepted as truth instead of the pathetic claptrap intended only to enrage the world against Israel. And due to a distinct Palestinian bias, the press peppered the gumbo about the Gaza war by declaring that 2/3 of the dead were innocent civilians. I got to point out that reliable estimates from credible sources indicate that the short war resulted in far fewer deaths than attributed by most international sources. And furthermore, 2/3 of those killed during the battles have been correctly identified as Palestinian terrorists. This was confirmed by reputable sources, but ignored by the press. An independent survey by the Interdisciplinary Center came to the same conclusions, noting that such a ratio in a crowded urban area where terrorists use civilians as human shields is evidence of a very high ethical code in the Israeli army. And it's true. The Israeli army goes so far out of its way to protect the innocent that they end up putting their own troops in harm's way. One must wonder how the UN can ignore the violence of Palestinian terrorists who use mosques to store weapons and explosives. How can the press close their eyes to Hamas murderers hiding in schools and intentionally drawing fire into civilian dwellings by launching attacks against Israeli soldiers from the inside of homes of non-combatants? This is where their fodder for staged videos of alleged Israeli aggression against civilians is produced. Hamas videographers relish every opportunity to parade casualties across the stage for every waiting journalist. But the reports rarely mentioned that it was terrorists who intentionally painted targets and built their public relations campaigns on the broken backs of innocent women and children behind whom these cowards were hiding. The world, it seems deceived and bent by bias. The press, they call them freedom fighters, but only murderous terrorists would force civilians to provide cover for their criminal behavior. In clear contradistinction, the honorable soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces left envelopes of money for innocent Palestinians when their dwellings had been temporarily used by IDF troops. The Israelis even made sure to clean the homes they had used while among the Palestinian civilians. Israel has always done their best to avoid bringing harm to non-combatants. But it is indisputable that Hamas intentionally causes suffering and brings devastation to their own people as an integral part of their strategy of war. Yet the UN and the likes of Amnesty International simply continue to condemn Israel. Shame on these gutless leaders and anti-Israel aid workers. And this brings me to a question I cannot answer. Maybe you can help me. It's easy to understand the devious motivation of Palestinian hate mongers. It's obvious why our enemies promote lies of Jewish atrocities to bolster their victim status among the cadre of international anti-Semites, prone to unstoppable hatred for the nation of Israel. But somehow, what I can't understand is why some Jews so easily mimic that same demented behavior. I ask this as a Jew. Can we be so liberal that we must hate ourselves? Israel has become a house divided. How do we unite so we can stand? I'll be back in a moment, but I want to make sure you know how you can get a free subscription to an informative magazine called Israel Today. I want you to know the real news from on the ground in Israel, and it can be yours for free. Please stay tuned.